Okay. Present yourself. Thank you. My name is Wilhelm Bergthaler. I'm in the same position as my colleague. It's Groundhog Day for me too. I've been here 4 years ago. I'm partner of a law firm and I'm actually working for the industry. So this is kind of an awkward situation that I should speak in front of NGOs. But with regard to renewables, this has become common, because the industries I represent really want to speed up and scale up renewables. And what I'm doing right now is I'm working on climate litigation on behalf of the industry against states and commissions that are moving too slowly. So you see, we find ourselves side by side on this matter. And this is why I would like to start with a sentence I noted from the excellent presentation of Julia Bonert. Euratom is a system that penetrates European policy and economy, I think you said. And that is exactly what we wanted to do with the European Energy Transition Protocol. We wanted to penetrate European energy systems with the idea of renewables. So that was the idea at the outset when the then environmental Minister André Rupprecht commissioned my colleague Franz Leidenmüller and me to write the European Energy Transition Protocol inspired by the Euratom Treaty. So putting the strengths Euratom has amassed over decades in favor of the energy transition. And when I was invited to this conference after 4 years again, there was of course a challenge. Should I simply repeat myself, or should I kind of ask what has happened since then? So I put in a subtitle, is it still an option in the face of multiple crises? And that is actually what I'm asking myself when going through the presentation. So let me just compare what were the objectives then in the Energy Transition Protocol, and I've put some quotes from the recitals up there for you. There was the intention to guarantee security of energy supply. There was the intention to care for consumers who are in need of protection against high energy prices. There was the intention to combat climate change and to reduce the Union's dependence on energy sources from unstable or exposed regions. So that was the long-term structure that was actually the model we wanted to base the energy transition on. And we find almost the exact wording today, or let me be more precise, yesterday, in a proposal for a council regulation that was sent out yesterday, laying down a framework to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy. You find the link down there. In order to tackle the exposure of European consumers, so here the consumers again, and to increase security of supply, Union needs to take immediate action. This is to put an end to the dependency on Russian fossil fuels while achieving a transition towards a climate neutral economy. So the objectives have been the same. They have become more pressing while the Commission right now acts on an emergency basis with short time measures. We then try to lay the basis for long-term structures. So this is something that could really be balanced right now. So the objectives are still valid. So let's take a closer look now at the strategies and the aims and tasks and instruments. What we did then as a strategy is pretty straightforward and easy. We were generally inspired by the Euratom solutions and thought, now this has worked very effectively for the nuclears. Why shouldn't we do that for the renewables as well? So we put it on stage of primary law. This is also something that has been said today. Euratom is primary law, so we wanted primary law status for the renewables as well. That requires an unanimous decision, the ratification by all member states, but still, it was not about abolishing nuclear energy then. It was just about having a level playing field for the renewables also, and thus establishing a counterbalance. The second set of strategies was that we wanted to strengthen the legal anchoring. We wanted to step up a level when it comes to the acceptance of renewables and slightly expand all of the provisions that were in place already. And the tactics or the strategy was wherever there was a competence, we turned it into a commitment, so that the Commission is not just entitled to do something, but is obliged, is committed to do something in favor of the renewables. And thus we tried to create an added legal value, not really inventing something completely new, but simply saying you have been entitled to do this all time long. You didn't do it, now you are committed. We are not inventing something. We are not coming up with something entirely new. Just do what you are entitled for. And when you were entitled to do this, this was not just a theoretical thing. There was, at the time when you got these rights, the clear perception that you would enact these rights and not just have them to show them around as a symbolic legislation. Yeah, so that was the structure of the protocol. It's still online, so many of you might know it. And we set a broad agenda then, and I would just highlight some points and contrast them again, what has happened in between and in how far this is still valid and still relevant. I green-lighted two topics in this agenda. It was establishing binding targets, and it was promoting research and innovation. Now, what has happened in between? Of course, we got the Repower EU Plan in 2018. We got the directive. We got a proposal for an amendment. We set binding EU targets. We aim to scale up, to speed up. We know what happened with that in many member states. They did so on a national level. They did not decide on how to divide the burden of reaching the targets on a provincial level. So in Austria, it's still open how much the contribution of the provinces is. That is very similar to the crisis of asylum-seeking people, where none of the provinces agrees to a certain number. So the burden sharing is not happening. So it is very hard for especially an industry installation to sue the province and say, why don't you come up with a zoning law where I can put solar power? Why don't you come up with a zoning law where I can put wind energy? Because I do not have a formula how much the province has to do within the entire system of Austria and of the state. So what we still lack is we do not have really a structure in place, not on the European level, not on the Austrian level, and thus we were exposed to the weaponization of energy. And that is something that is even now going on. We get this very short-term proposal of yesterday for a regulation where it says now we are going to acknowledge that there is an overriding public interest to promote the renewables. This is effectively an exemption from EU natural habitats law and also water protection law. They are coming up with exemptions from the environmental impact assessment, but that is just a punctual relief when in the permitting process of new renewable energy installations. This is not the structure. This is not the system. This will not help in the long run. So again, we have not come up on the EU level with a really strong system that is comparable to Euratom to really promote and secure the energy production through renewables in a scale that fits the demand. And there again, I do not want to be overly wise, but remember what we put in the protocol. We put in the protocol, look beyond the borders, look for collaboration, not only with member states, but also with third countries and countries outside Europe. And just remember right now in the energy crisis, the television, the pictures of the politicians shaking hands with leaders outside Europe in an uneasy way, often in an embarrassed way, where we would have wished that there should have been established contacts and scenarios long ago to be not one-sidedly dependent. And I had a similar discussion at the IBA in Miami a week ago, and European lawyers were showing maps that were just included Europe and Eastern Europe for energy deliveries and for the pipelines and the grids. And of course, the African members started to question, now why is Africa missing? We have a pipeline through the Mediterranean Sea. You have several projects. Why are you leaving out Africa completely? And I think this is really a warning that within all our discussions in Europe, we only look east or west, trying to decide for one or the other side, but we completely leave out looking south, and we completely leave out this very cherished continent of Africa. Let me just go through the instruments of the protocol just to show you or illustrate what I mean. What we intended then was to come up with the framework with a kind of holistic approach. We really wanted a system change when we came up with the protocol, and we just had to copy actually what European had been doing. And you see this goes from research to setting targets to establishing financing instruments, securing social protection, affordable energy for vulnerable consumers, state aid, public procurement provisions even, and international agreements. So actually an entire and concise system of promoting that kind of energy. And in many cases, we just had to exchange the word nuclear into renewable. I mean, it was a bit more difficult because we did not want to set up an entirely new international organization, but still, just going through some of these slides, I won't do all of them. We had a research program that was really modeled after the Euratom treaty. We wanted to put that task in the hands of the environmental agency that is already in place there. So not coming up with new institutions, but strengthening institutions. We wanted to care that the research work is published and there is a publication of knowledge. Now, again, let me remind you of what Julia said, that there is no transparency within Euratom. Now, we need transparency in research for renewables, and not just on the technical side, also on the ecological side. There is a lot of very valid research as regards mitigation strategies, or the so-called CEF measures, the continued ecological functionality, where we really need ecology and engineering to combine to find the best viable solutions. So that is something where we came up with an exchange of results, with publishing, with granting licenses. The same is true for investment programs, with joint undertakings, with targets and action plans. So this is again a way to simply transform it. Some of this has been done by the RED I and RED II directives, but still it is not safeguarded. It could have been watered down with the next directive, with a next program, and setting it on a primary law level would have prevented just that these steps of progress could not have been or cannot be watered down once they are in a primary law level. Yeah, I already mentioned the energy market, where we had measures for the vulnerable consumers, energy efficiency, energy savings. I won't go through that word by word, but that was simply the stuff we put in there. Perhaps stopping with public procurement, this is something that still has not been done, especially the life cycle approach. With procurement laws, we have very fine laws of the tender procedure, but we completely miss out the pre-procurement phase, where a municipality decides, are we going to invite tenders for a diesel bus, or for an electric bus, or for a gas-driven bus or for a hydrogen-driven bus. So this is completely out of the scope. These pre-procurement decisions, there is nobody participating, no public participation, which is in violation to the Aarhus Convention, by the way, at least as far as the committee in Geneva is concerned. So that was something where we could really have said, now, no, the municipalities are not free in deciding what kind of bus system they are coming up with. They have to base it primarily on renewables. International agreements is something I mentioned already. Even if it's just a self-commitment of the Union to make these negotiations and conclude these agreements, this would have set kind of a strategy. What are you doing? How are you using these provisions? Right now, we have nobody who declares himself responsible for the way the European energy system is being built, for the dependencies that have been foreseeable. And this should change. There should be really clear commitments, even if it's just a self-commitment, just to be able to ask the Commission, now there was this commitment, and what have you done in the past? What have you done with Africa in the past? Is it just the 2 pipelines crossing the Mediterranean? How is Africa participating in what you are doing there? Are you exploiting or are you partnering? So that is something that is still on the table, and that is why I believe that also these provisions, although they are very small and short and just explain and base a self-commitment, would be really helpful and necessary. And that leads me to the conclusion. I hope I'm in time, or I made up some time. The transition of renewables is not just about speed. So when you get the impression right now with what politicians do, all you see is speeding up and scaling up. But it's more, it's about differing, it's about building a completely different energy systems, as the colleague from the Netherlands, Jan Rothmans, said. So you have to be broader, not just faster. You have to think of systems, not just of short-term solutions. You have to think beyond short-term energy measures. So I think that an energy protocol, a renewables protocol, would still be a viable option. Of course, it has to be updated. Of course, you can go one step further or one dimension further, as my learned colleague Michael Geistlinger has done and will present in a very short time to you. But still, do not let us just restrict ourselves to act in emergency. We really have to rebuild the system. This is not going to go away. The crises are going to stay with us. And if we want renewables, we need a system where that is promoted. There's a lot of very exciting research in this. There is a lot of energy also from people coming who want to really build this. So let's do this also in an institutional way and not just with some short-term regulation and directive. Thank you.